Welcome to Catholic Culture Audiobooks, a production of CatholicCulture.org and under the patronage of St. John Henry Newman. Today's reading, Knowledge, Its Own End, From the Idea of a University, by St. John Henry Newman, narrated by James T. Majewski. A university may be considered with reference either to its students or to its studies. And the principle that all knowledge is a whole and the separate sciences parts of one, which I have hitherto been using in behalf of its studies, is equally important when we direct our attention to its students. Now then I turn to the students, and shall consider the education which, by virtue of this principle, a university will give them. And thus I shall be introduced, gentlemen, to the second question which I propose to discuss, namely, whether and in what sense its teaching, viewed relatively to the taught, carries the attribute of utility along with it. I have said that all branches of knowledge are connected together, because the subject matter of knowledge is intimately united in itself as being the acts and the work of the Creator. Hence it is that the sciences, into which our knowledge may be said to be cast, have multiplied bearings one on another, and an internal sympathy, and admit, or rather demand, comparison and adjustment. They complete, correct, balance each other. This consideration, if well-founded, must be taken into account not only as regards the attainment of truth, which is their common end, but as regards the influence which they exercise upon those whose education consists in the study of them. I have said already that to give undue prominence to one is to be unjust to another. To neglect or supersede these is to divert those from their proper object. It is to unsettle the boundary lines between science and science, to disturb their action, to destroy the harmony which binds them together. Such a proceeding will have a corresponding effect when introduced into a place of education. There is no science but tells a different tale when viewed as a portion of a whole from what it is likely to suggest when taken by itself, without the safeguard, as I may call it, of others. Let me make use of an illustration. In the combination of colors, very different effects are produced by a difference in their selection and juxtaposition. Red, green, and white change their shades according to the contrast to which they are submitted. And in like manner, the drift and meaning of a branch of knowledge varies with the company in which it is introduced to the student. If his reading is confined simply to one subject, however such division of labor may favor the advancement of a particular pursuit, a point into which I do not here enter, certainly it has a tendency to contract his mind. If it is incorporated with others, it depends on those others as to the kind of influence which it exerts upon him. Thus the classics, which in England are the means of refining the taste, have in France subserved the spread of revolutionary and deistical doctrines. In metaphysics, again, Butler's analogy of religion, which has had so much to do with the conversion to the Catholic faith of members of the University of Oxford, appeared to Pitt and others, who had received a different training, to operate only in the direction of infidelity. And so again Watson, Bishop of Llandaff, as I think he tells us in the narrative of his life, felt the science of mathematics to indispose the mind to religious belief, while others see in its investigations the best parallel, and thereby defense, of the Christian mysteries. In like manner, I suppose, Arcesilaus would not have handled logic as Aristotle, nor Aristotle have criticized poets as Plato. Yet reasoning and poetry are subject to scientific rules. It is a great point, then, to enlarge the range of studies which a university professes, even for the sake of the students. And though they cannot pursue every subject which is open to them, they will be the gainers by living among those and under those who represent the whole circle. This I conceive to be the advantage of a seat of universal learning, considered as a place of education. An assemblage of learned men, zealous for their own sciences and rivals of each other, are brought, by familiar intercourse and for the sake of intellectual peace, to adjust together the claims and relations of their respective subjects of investigation. They learn to respect, to consult, to aid each other. Thus is created a pure and clear atmosphere of thought, which the student also breathes, though in his own case he only pursues a few sciences out of the multitude. He profits by an intellectual tradition which is independent of particular teachers, which guides him in his choice of subjects, and duly interprets for him those which he chooses. He apprehends the great outlines of knowledge, the principles on which it rests, the scale of its parts, its lights and its shades, its great points and its little, as he otherwise cannot apprehend them. Hence it is that his education is called liberal. A habit of mind is formed which lasts through life, of which the attributes are freedom, equitableness, calmness, moderation, and wisdom, or what in a former discourse I have ventured to call a philosophical habit. This, then, I would assign as the special fruit of the education furnished at a university, as contrasted with other places of teaching or modes of teaching. This is the main purpose of a university in its treatment of its students. And how the question is asked me, what is the use of it? And my answer will constitute the main subject of the discourses which are to follow. Cautious and practical thinkers, I say, will ask of me, what, after all, is the gain of this philosophy, of which I make such account, and from which I promise so much? Even supposing it to enable us to exercise the degree of trust exactly due to every science respectively, and to estimate precisely the value of every truth which is anywhere to be found, how are we better for this master view of things which I have been extolling? Does it not reverse the principle of the division of labor? Will practical objects be obtained better or worse by its cultivation? To what then does it lead? Where does it end? What does it do? How does it profit? What does it promise? Particular sciences are respectively the basis of definite arts, which carry on to results tangible and beneficial the truths which are the subjects of the knowledge attained. What is the art of this science of sciences? What is the fruit of such a philosophy? What are we proposing to effect? What inducements do we hold out to the Catholic community when we set about the enterprise of founding a university? I am asked what is the end of university education, and of the liberal or philosophical knowledge which I conceive it to impart. I answer, that what I have already said has been sufficient to show that it has a very tangible, real, and sufficient end, though the end cannot be divided from that knowledge itself. Knowledge is capable of being its own end. Such is the constitution of the human mind, that any kind of knowledge, if it be really such, is its own reward. And if this is true of all knowledge, it is true also of that special philosophy which I have made to consist in a comprehensive view of truth in all its branches, of the relations of science to science, of their mutual bearings and their respective values. What the worth of such an acquirement is, compared with other objects which we seek, wealth or power or honor or the conveniences and comforts of life, I do not profess here to discuss, but I would maintain and mean to show that it is an object in its own nature so really and undeniably good as to be the compensation of a great deal of thought in the compassing and a great deal of trouble in the attaining. Now, when I say that knowledge is not merely a means to something beyond it, or the preliminary of certain arts into which it naturally resolves, but an end sufficient to rest in and to pursue for its own sake, surely I am uttering no paradox, for I am stating what is both intelligible in itself and has ever been the common judgment of philosophers and the ordinary feeling of mankind. I am saying what at least the public opinion of this day ought to be slow to deny, considering how much we have heard of late years, in opposition to religion, of entertaining, curious, and various knowledge. I am but saying what whole volumes have been written to illustrate, namely, by a selection from the records of philosophy, literature, and art in all ages and countries, of a body of examples, to show how the most unpropitious circumstances have been unable to conquer an ardent desire for the acquisition of knowledge. That further advantages accrue to us and redound to others by its possession over and above what it is in itself, I am very far indeed from denying, but independent of these, we are satisfying a direct need of our nature in its very acquisition. And whereas our nature, unlike that of the inferior creation, does not at once reach its perfection, but depends, in order to it, on a number of external aids and appliances, knowledge, as one of the principal of these, is valuable for what its very presence in us does for us after the manner of a habit, even though it be turned to no further account, nor subserve any direct end. Hence it is that Cicero, in enumerating the various heads of mental excellence, lays down the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake as the first of them. This pertains most of all to human nature, he says, for we are all of us drawn to the pursuit of knowledge, in which to excel we consider excellent, whereas to mistake, to err, to be ignorant, to be deceived, is both an evil and a disgrace. And he considers knowledge the very first object to which we are attracted after the supply of our physical wants. After the calls and duties of our animal existence, as they may be termed, as regards ourselves, our family, and our neighbors, follows, he tells us, the search after truth. Accordingly, as soon as we escape from the pressure of necessary cares, forthwith we desire to see, to hear, and to learn, and consider the knowledge of what is hidden or is wonderful a condition of our happiness. This passage, though it is but one of many similar passages in a multitude of authors, I take for the very reason that it is so familiarly known to us, and I wish you to observe, gentlemen, how distinctly it separates the pursuit of knowledge from those ulterior objects to which certainly it can be made to conduce, and which are, I suppose, solely contemplated by the persons who would ask of me the use of a university or liberal education. So far from dreaming of the cultivation of knowledge directly and mainly in order to our physical comfort and enjoyment, for the sake of life and person, of health, of the conjugal and family union, of the social tie and civil security, the great orator implies that it is only after our physical and political needs are supplied, and when we are free from necessary duties and cares, that we are in a condition for desiring to see, to hear, and to learn. Nor does he contemplate in the least degree the reflex or subsequent action of knowledge, when acquired, upon those material goods which we set out by securing before we seek it. On the contrary, he expressly denies its bearing upon social life altogether, strange as such a procedure is to those who live after the rise of the Baconian philosophy, and he cautions us against such a cultivation of it as will interfere with our duties to our fellow creatures. All these methods, he says, are engaged in the investigation of truth, by the pursuit of which to be carried off from public occupations is a transgression of duty. For the praise of virtue lies altogether in action, yet intermissions often occur, and then we recur to such pursuits. Not to say that the incessant activity of the mind is vigorous enough to carry us on in the pursuit of knowledge, even without any exertion of our own. The idea of benefiting society by means of the pursuit of science and knowledge did not enter at all into the motives which he would assign for their cultivation. This was the ground of the opposition which the elder Cato made to the introduction of Greek philosophy among his countrymen, when Carneades and his companions, on occasion of their embassy, were charming the Roman youth with their eloquent expositions of it. The fit representative of a practical people, Cato estimated everything by what it produced, whereas the pursuit of knowledge promised nothing beyond knowledge itself. He despised that refinement or enlargement of mind of which he had no experience. Things which can bear to be cut off from everything else and yet persist in living must have life in themselves. Pursuits which issue in nothing and still maintain their ground for ages, which are regarded as admirable, though they have not as yet proved themselves to be useful, must have their sufficient end in themselves, whatever it turn out to be. And we are brought to the same conclusion by considering the force of the epithet, by which the knowledge under consideration is popularly designated. It is common to speak of liberal knowledge, of the liberal arts and studies, and of a liberal education, as the especial characteristic or property of a university and of a gentleman. What is really meant by the word? Now, first, in its grammatical sense, it is opposed to servile, and by servile work is understood, as our catechisms inform us, bodily labor, mechanical employment, and the like, in which the mind has little or no part. Parallel to such servile works are those arts, if they deserve the name, of which the poet speaks, which owe their origin and their method to hazard, not to skill, as, for instance, the practice and operations of an empiric. As far as this contrast may be considered as a guide into the meaning of the word, liberal education and liberal pursuits are exercises of mind, of reason, of reflection. But we want something more for its explanation, for there are bodily exercises which are liberal, and mental exercises which are not so. For instance, in ancient times the practitioners in medicine were commonly slaves, yet it was an art as intellectual in its nature, in spite of the pretense, fraud, and quackery with which it might then as now be debased, as it was heavenly in its aim. And so in like manner we contrast a liberal education with a commercial education or a professional. Yet no one can deny that commerce and the professions afford scope for the highest and most diversified powers of mind. There is, then, a great variety of intellectual exercises which are not technically called liberal. On the other hand, I say, there are exercises of the body which do receive that appellation. Such, for instance, was the palestra in ancient times, such the Olympic games, in which strength and dexterity of body as well as of mind gained the prize. In Xenophon we read of the young Persian nobility being taught to ride on horseback and to speak the truth, both being among the accomplishments of a gentleman. War, too, however rough a profession, has ever been accounted liberal, unless in cases when it becomes heroic, which would introduce us to another subject. Now, comparing these instances together, we shall have no difficulty in determining the principle of this apparent variation in the application of the term which I am examining. Manly games, or games of skill, or military prowess, though bodily, are, it seems, accounted liberal. On the other hand, what is merely professional, though highly intellectual, nay, though liberal in comparison of trade and manual labor, is not simply called liberal, and mercantile occupations are not liberal at all. Why this distinction? Because that alone is liberal knowledge which stands on its own pretensions, which is independent of sequel, expects no compliment, refuses to be informed, as it is called, by any end, or absorbed into any art, in order duly to present itself to our contemplation. The most ordinary pursuits have this specific character, if they are self-sufficient and complete. The highest lose it when they minister to something beyond them. It is absurd to balance, in point of worth and importance, a treatise on reducing fractures with a game of cricket or a fox chase. Yet of the two, the bodily exercise has that quality which we call liberal, and the intellectual has it not. And so of the learned professions altogether, considered merely as professions. Although one of them be the most popularly beneficial, and another the most politically important, and the third the most intimately divine of all human pursuits, yet the very greatness of their end, the health of the body, or of the commonwealth, or of the soul, diminishes, not increases, their claim to the appellation liberal, and that still more if they are cut down to the strict exigencies of that end. If, for instance, theology, instead of being cultivated as a contemplation, be limited to the purposes of the pulpit or be represented by the catechism, it loses, not its usefulness, not its divine character, not its meritoriousness, rather it gains a claim upon these titles by such charitable condescension, but it does lose the particular attribute which I am illustrating. Just as a face worn by tears and fasting loses its beauty, or a laborer's hand loses its delicateness. For theology thus exercised is not simple knowledge, but rather is an art or a business making use of theology. And thus it appears that even what is supernatural need not be liberal, nor need a hero be a gentleman, for the plain reason that one idea is not another idea. And in like manner the Baconian philosophy, by using its physical sciences in the service of man, does thereby transfer them from the order of liberal pursuits to, I do not say the inferior, but the distinct class of the useful. And, to take a different instance, hence again, as is evident, whenever personal gain is the motive, still more distinctive an effect has it upon the character of a given pursuit. Thus racing, which was a liberal exercise in Greece, forfeits its rank in times like these, so far as it is made the occasion of gambling. All that I have been now saying is summed up in a few characteristic words of the great philosopher. Of possessions, he says, those rather are useful which bear fruit, those liberal which tend to enjoyment. By fruitful I mean which yield revenue, by enjoyable where nothing accrues of consequence beyond the using. Do not suppose that in thus appealing to the ancients I am throwing back the world 2,000 years and fettering philosophy with the reasonings of paganism. While the world lasts, will Aristotle's doctrine on these matters last, for he is the oracle of nature and of truth. While we are men, we cannot help to a great extent being Aristotelians, for the great master does but analyze the thoughts, feelings, views, and opinions of humankind. He has told us the meaning of our own words and ideas before we were born. In many subject matters, to think correctly is to think like Aristotle, and we are his disciples whether we will or no, though we may not know it. Now, as to the particular instance before us, the word liberal, as applied to knowledge and education, expresses a specific idea which ever has been and ever will be, while the nature of man is the same, just as the idea of the beautiful is specific, or of the sublime, or of the ridiculous, or of the sordid. It is in the world now, it was in the world then, and, as in the case of the dogmas of faith, it is illustrated by a continuous historical tradition, and never was out of the world from the time it came into it. There have indeed been differences of opinion from time to time as to what pursuits and what arts came under that idea, but such differences are but an additional evidence of its reality. That idea must have a substance in it which has maintained its ground amid these conflicts and changes, which has ever served as a standard to measure things withal, which has passed from mind to mind unchanged, when there was so much to color, so much to influence any notion or thought whatever, which was not founded in our very nature. Were it a mere generalization, it would have varied with the subjects from which it was generalized, but though its subjects vary with the age, it varies not itself. The Palestra may seem a liberal exercise to Lycurgus and illiberal to Seneca. Coach driving and prize fighting may be recognized in Ellis and be condemned in England. Music may be despicable in the eyes of certain moderns and be in the highest place with Aristotle and Plato, and the case is the same in the particular application of the idea of beauty or of goodness or of moral virtue. There is a difference of tastes, a difference of judgments. Still, these variations imply, instead of discrediting, the archetypal idea, which is but a previous hypothesis or condition, by means of which issue is joined between contending opinions, and without which there would be nothing to dispute about. I consider, then, that I am chargeable with no paradox when I speak of a knowledge which is its own end, when I call it liberal knowledge or a gentleman's knowledge, when I educate for it and make it the scope of a university. And still less am I incurring such a charge when I make this acquisition consist, not in knowledge in a vague and ordinary sense, but in that knowledge which I have especially called philosophy, or, in an extended sense of the word, science. For whatever claims knowledge has to be considered as a good, these it has in a higher degree when it is viewed not vaguely, not popularly, but precisely and transcendently as philosophy. Knowledge, I say, is then especially liberal or sufficient for itself, apart from every external and ulterior object, when and so far as it is philosophical. And this I proceed to show. Now bear with me, gentlemen, if what I am about to say has at first sight a fanciful appearance. Philosophy, then, or science, is related to knowledge in this way. Knowledge is called by the name of science or philosophy when it is acted upon, informed, or if I may use a strong figure, impregnated by reason. Reason is the principle of that intrinsic fecundity of knowledge which, to those who possess it, is its especial value, and which dispenses with the necessity of their looking abroad for any end to rest upon external to itself. Knowledge, indeed, when thus exalted into a scientific form, is also power. Not only is it excellent in itself, but whatever such excellence may be, it is something more. It has a result beyond itself. Doubtless. But that is a further consideration, with which I am not concerned. I only say that, prior to its being a power, it is a good, that it is not only an instrument, but an end. I know well it may resolve itself into an art, and terminate in a mechanical process, and intangible fruit. But it also may fall back upon that reason which informs it, and resolve itself into philosophy. In one case it is called useful knowledge, in the other, liberal. The same person may cultivate it in both ways at once. But this again is a matter foreign to my subject. Here I do but say that there are two ways of using knowledge, and in matter of fact, those who use it in one way are not likely to use it in the other, or at least in a very limited measure. You see, then, here are two methods of education. The end of the one is to be philosophical, of the other to be mechanical. The one rises towards general ideas, the other is exhausted upon what is particular and external. Let me not be thought to deny the necessity, or to decry the benefit, of such attention to what is particular and practical as belongs to the useful or mechanical arts. Life could not go on without them. We owe our daily welfare to them. Their exercise is the duty of the many, and we owe to the many a debt of gratitude for fulfilling that duty. I only say that knowledge, in proportion as it tends more and more to be particular, ceases to be knowledge. It is a question whether knowledge can in any proper sense be predicated of the brute creation. Without pretending to metaphysical exactness of phraseology, which would be unsuitable to an occasion like this, I say, it seems to me improper to call that passive sensation or perception of things which brutes seem to possess by the name of knowledge. When I speak of knowledge, I mean something intellectual, something which grasps what it perceives through the senses, something which takes a view of things, which sees more than the senses convey, which reasons upon what it sees, and while it sees, which invests it with an idea. It expresses itself not in a mere enunciation, but by an enthymeme. It is of the nature of science from the first, and in this consists its dignity. The principle of real dignity in knowledge, its worth, its desirableness, considered irrespectively of its results, is this germ within it of a scientific or a philosophical process. This is how it comes to be an end in itself. This is why it admits of being called liberal. Not to know the relative disposition of things is the state of slaves or children. To have mapped out the universe is the boast, or at least the ambition, of philosophy. Moreover, such knowledge is not a mere extrinsic or accidental advantage, which is ours today and another's tomorrow, which may be got up from a book and easily forgotten again, which we can command or communicate at our pleasure, which we can borrow for the occasion, carry about in our hand, and take into the market. It is an acquired illumination. It is a habit, a personal possession, and an inward endowment. And this is the reason why it is more correct, as well as more usual, to speak of a university as a place of education than of instruction, though, when knowledge is concerned, instruction would at first sight have seemed the more appropriate word. We are instructed, for instance, in manual exercises, in the fine and useful arts, in trades, and in ways of business. For these are methods, which have little or no effect upon the mind itself, are contained in rules committed to memory, to tradition, or to use, and bear upon an end external to themselves. But education is a higher word. It implies an action upon our mental nature and the formation of a character. It is something individual and permanent, and is commonly spoken of in connection with religion and virtue. When then we speak of the communication of knowledge as being education, we thereby really imply that that knowledge is a state or condition of mind. And since cultivation of mind is surely worth seeking for its own sake, we are thus brought once more to the conclusion, which the word liberal and the word philosophy have already suggested, that there is a knowledge which is desirable, though nothing come of it, as being of itself a treasure, and a sufficient remuneration of years of labor. This, then, is the answer which I am prepared to give to the question with which I opened this discourse. Before going on to speak of the object of the Church in taking up philosophy, and the uses to which she puts it, I am prepared to maintain that philosophy is its own end, and, as I conceive, I have now begun the proof of it. I am prepared to maintain that there is a knowledge worth possessing for what it is, and not merely for what it does. And what minutes remain to me today I shall devote to the removal of some portion of the indistinctness and confusion with which the subject may in some minds be surrounded. It may be objected, then, that, when we profess to seek knowledge for some end or other beyond itself, whatever it be, we speak intelligibly, but that, whatever men may have said, however obstinately the idea may have kept its ground from age to age, still it is simply unmeaning to say that we seek knowledge for its own sake and for nothing else, for that it ever leads to something beyond itself, which therefore is its end, and the cause why it is desirable. Moreover, that this end is twofold, either of this world or of the next, that all knowledge is cultivated either for secular objects or for eternal, that if it is directed to secular objects it is called useful knowledge, if to eternal, religious or Christian knowledge. In consequence, that if, as I have allowed, this liberal knowledge does not benefit the body or estate, it ought to benefit the soul. But if the fact be really so, that it is neither a physical or a secular good on the one hand, nor a moral good on the other, it cannot be a good at all, and is not worth the trouble which is necessary for its acquisition. And then I may be reminded that the professors of this liberal or philosophical knowledge have themselves in every age recognized this exposition of the matter, and have submitted to the issue in which it terminates. For they have ever been attempting to make men virtuous, or if not, at least have assumed that refinement of mind was virtue, and that they themselves were the virtuous portion of mankind. This they have professed on the one hand, and on the other they have utterly failed in their professions, so as ever to make themselves a proverb among men, and a laughing-stock both to the grave and the dissipated portion of mankind in consequence of them. Thus they have furnished against themselves both the ground and the means of their own exposure, without any trouble at all to anyone else. In a word, from the time that Athens was the university of the world, what has philosophy taught men but to promise without practicing, and to aspire without attaining? What has the deep and lofty thought of its disciples ended in but eloquent words? Nay, what has its teaching ever meditated, when it was boldest in its remedies for human ill, beyond charming us to sleep by its lessons, that we might feel nothing at all? Like some melodious air, or rather like those strong and transporting perfumes, which at first spread their sweetness over everything they touch, but in a little while do but offend in proportion as they once pleased us. Did philosophy support Cicero under the disfavor of the fickle populace, or nerve Seneca to oppose an imperial tyrant? It abandoned Brutus, as he sorrowfully confessed, in his greatest need, and it forced Cato, as his panegyrist strangely boasts, into the false position of defying heaven. How few can be counted among its professors who, like Polemo, were thereby converted from a profligate course, or like Anaxagoras, thought the world well lost in exchange for its possession. The philosopher in Rasselas taught a superhuman doctrine, and then succumbed without an effort to a trial of human affection. He discoursed, we are told, with great energy on the government of the passions. His look was venerable, his action graceful, his pronunciation clear, and his diction elegant. He showed with great strength of sentiment and variety of illustration that human nature is degraded and debased when the lower faculties predominate over the higher, He communicated the various precepts given from time to time for the conquest of passion, and displayed the happiness of those who had obtained the important victory after which man is no longer the slave of fear nor the fool of hope. He enumerated many examples of heroes immovable by pain or pleasure, who looked with indifference on those modes or accidents to which the vulgar give the names of good and evil. Rasselas in a few days found the philosopher in a room half darkened, with his eyes misty and his face pale. "Sir," said he, "you have come at a time when all human friendship is useless. What I suffer cannot be remedied. What I have lost cannot be supplied. My daughter, my only daughter, from whose tenderness I expected all the comforts of my age, died last night of a fever." "Sir," said the prince, "mortality is an event by which a wise man can never be surprised. We know that death is always near, and it should therefore always be expected." "Young man," answered the philosopher, "you speak like one who has never felt the pangs of separation." "Have you then forgot the precept," said Rasselas, "which you so powerfully enforced? Consider that external things are naturally variable, but truth and reason are always the same." "What comfort," said the mourner, "can truth and reason afford me? Of what effect are they now, but to tell me that my daughter will not be restored?" Better, far better to make no professions, you will say, than to cheat others with what we are not, and to scandalize them with what we are. The sensualist, or the man of the world, at any rate, is not the victim of fine words, but pursues a reality and gains it. The philosophy of utility, you will say, gentlemen, has at least done its work, and I grant it. It aimed low, but it has fulfilled its aim. If that man of great intellect who has been its prophet, in the conduct of life played false to his own professions, he was not bound by his philosophy to be true to his friend or faithful in his trust. Moral virtue was not the line in which he undertook to instruct men. And though, as the poet calls him, he were the meanest of mankind, he was so in what may be called his private capacity, and without any prejudice to the theory of induction. He had a right to be so, if he chose, for anything that the idols of the den or the theater had to say to the contrary. His mission was the increase of physical enjoyment and social comfort, and most wonderfully, most awfully has he fulfilled his conception and his design. Almost day by day have we fresh shoots and buds and blossoms which are to ripen into fruit on that magical tree of knowledge which he planted, and to which none of us perhaps, except the very poor, but owes, if not his present life, at least his daily food, his health, and general well-being. He was the divinely provided minister of temporal benefits to all of us so great that, whatever I am forced to think of him as a man, I have not the heart, from mere gratitude, to speak of him severely. And in spite of the tendencies of his philosophy, which are, as we see it this day, to depreciate or to trample on theology, he has himself in his writings gone out of his way, as if with a prophetic misgiving of those tendencies, to insist on it as the instrument of that beneficent Father who, when he came on earth in visible form, took on him first and most prominently the office of assuaging the bodily wounds of human nature. And truly, like the old mediciner in the tale, he sat diligently at his work and hummed with cheerful countenance a pious song, and then in turn went out singing into the meadows so gaily that those who had seen him from afar might well have thought it was a youth gathering flowers for his beloved, instead of an old physician gathering healing herbs in the morning dew. Alas, that men, in the action of life or in their heart of hearts, are not what they seem to be in their moments of excitement, or in their trances or intoxications of genius. So good, so noble, so serene. Alas, that Bacon, too, in his own way, should after all be but the fellow of those heathen philosophers, who in their disadvantages had some excuse for their inconsistency, and who surprise us rather in what they did say than in what they did not do. Alas, that he, too, like Socrates or Seneca, must be stripped of his holy day coat, which looks so fair, and should be but a mockery amid his most majestic gravity of phrase, and for all his vast abilities should, in the littleness of his own moral being, but typify the intellectual narrowness of his school. However, granting all this, heroism, after all, was not his philosophy. I cannot deny he has abundantly achieved what he proposed. His is simply a method whereby bodily discomforts and temporal wants are to be most effectually removed from the greatest number, and already, before it has shown any signs of exhaustion, the gifts of nature, in their most artificial shapes and luxurious profusion and diversity, from all quarters of the earth, are, it is undeniable, by its means brought even to our doors, and we rejoice in them. Useful knowledge, then, I grant, has done its work, and liberal knowledge as certainly has not done its work. That is, supposing, as the objectors assume, its direct end, like religious knowledge, is to make men better. But this I will not for an instant allow, and, unless I allow it, those objectors have said nothing to the purpose. I admit, rather I maintain, what they have been urging, for I consider knowledge to have its end in itself. For all its friends or its enemies may say, I insist upon it, that it is as real a mistake to burden it with virtue or religion as with the mechanical arts. Its direct business is not to steel the soul against temptation or to console it in affliction, any more than to set the loom in motion or to direct the steam carriage. Be it ever so much the means or the condition of both material and moral advancement, still, taken by and in itself, it as little mends our hearts as it improves our temporal circumstances. And if its eulogists claim for it such a power, they commit the very same kind of encroachment on a province not their own as the political economist who should maintain that his science educated him for casuistry or diplomacy. Knowledge is one thing, virtue is another. Good sense is not conscience. Refinement is not humility, nor is largeness and justness of view faith. Philosophy, however enlightened, however profound, gives no command over the passions, no influential motives, no vivifying principles. Liberal education makes not the Christian, not the Catholic, but the gentleman. It is well to be a gentleman. It is well to have a cultivated intellect, a delicate taste, a candid, equitable, dispassionate mind, a noble and courteous bearing in the conduct of life. These are the connatural qualities of a large knowledge. They are the objects of a university. I am advocating, I shall illustrate and insist upon them. But still, I repeat, they are no guarantee for sanctity or even for conscientiousness. They may attach to the man of the world, to the profligate, to the heartless, pleasant, alas, and attractive as he shows when decked out in them. Taken by themselves, they do but seem to be what they are not. They look like virtue at a distance, but they are detected by close observers and on the long run. And hence it is that they are popularly accused of pretense and hypocrisy, not, I repeat, from their own fault, but because their professors and their admirers persist in taking them for what they are not, and are officious in arrogating for them a praise to which they have no claim. Quarry the granite rock with razors, or moor the vessel with a thread of silk. Then may you hope, with such keen and delicate instruments as human knowledge and human reason, to contend against those giants, the passion and the pride of man. Surely we are not driven to theories of this kind in order to vindicate the value and dignity of liberal knowledge. Surely the real grounds on which its pretensions rest are not so very subtle or abstruse, so very strange or improbable. Surely it is very intelligible to say, and that is what I say here, that liberal education viewed in itself is simply the cultivation of the intellect as such, and its object is nothing more or less than intellectual excellence. Everything has its own perfection, be it higher or lower in the scale of things, and the perfection of one is not the perfection of another. Things animate, inanimate, visible, invisible, All are good in their kind, and have a best of themselves, which is an object of pursuit. Why do you take such pains with your garden or your park? You see to your walks and turf and shrubberies, to your trees and drives, not as if you meant to make an orchard of the one, or corn or pasture land of the other, but because there is a special beauty in all that is goodly in wood, water, plain, and slope, brought all together by art into one shape and grouped into one whole. Your cities are beautiful, your palaces, your public buildings, your territorial mansions, your churches, and their beauty leads to nothing beyond itself. There is a physical beauty and a moral. There is a beauty of person, there is a beauty of our moral being, which is natural virtue. And in like manner, there is a beauty, there is a perfection of the intellect. There is an ideal perfection in these various subject matters, towards which individual instances are seen to rise, and which are the standards for all instances whatever. The Greek divinities and demigods, as the statuary has molded them, with their symmetry of figure and their high forehead and their regular features, are the perfection of physical beauty. The heroes of whom history tells, Alexander, or Caesar, or Scipio, or Saladin, are the representatives of that magnanimity or self-mastery which is the greatness of human nature. Christianity, too, has its heroes, and in the supernatural order, and we call them saints. The artist puts before him beauty of feature and form, the poet, beauty of mind, the preacher, the beauty of grace. Then intellect, too, I repeat, has its beauty, and it has those who aim at it. To open the mind, to correct it, to refine it, to enable it to know and to digest, master, rule, and use its knowledge, to give it power over its own faculties, application, flexibility, method, critical exactness, sagacity, resource, address, eloquent expression, is an object as intelligible, for here we are inquiring not what the object of a liberal education is worth, nor what the use the Church makes of it, but what it is in itself. I say, an object as intelligible as the cultivation of virtue, while at the same time it is absolutely distinct from it. This indeed is but a temporal object and a transitory possession, but so are other things in themselves which we make much of and pursue. The moralist will tell us that man, in all his functions, is but a flower which blossoms and fades, except so far as a higher principle breathes upon him and makes him and what he is immortal. Body and mind are carried on into an eternal state of being by the gifts of divine munificence. But at first they do but fail in a failing world. And if the powers of intellect decay, the powers of the body have decayed before them. And as a hospital or an almshouse, though its end be ephemeral, may be sanctified to the service of religion, so surely may a university, even were it nothing more than I have as yet described it. We attain to heaven by using this world well, though it is to pass away. We perfect our nature, not by undoing it, but by adding to it what is more than nature, and directing it towards aims higher than its own. This has been Knowledge Its Own End, from The Idea of a University, by St. John Henry Newman, narrated by James T. Majewski. Production copyright 2022 by Trinity Communications. This podcast is brought to you by CatholicCulture.org and made possible by listener support. To donate, please visit CatholicCulture.org/donate/audio. That's CatholicCulture.org/donate/audio.